Topic 2 is where we start our discussion on dividing a polynomial by a binomial. And I am going to split this into three separate examples. And excuse me, I've made a lot of videos today, done a lot of talking. I may have to take water breaks. Okay, so just like with long division of whole numbers, I'm going to go through the steps for long division with polynomials. And they may not completely make sense until you see it in practice, but bear with me and hang in there. And if you haven't had a chance to go back and practice just regular long division with whole numbers, it's worth practicing because those same steps are going to be basically the same down here, just involving algebra. Okay, so first of all, what you have to do is you have to arrange the terms in the dividend and divisor in descending powers of the variable. So basically put the divisor and the dividend in standard form. So highest exponent to lowest exponent, and then end with the constant, okay? And then here's where the steps start to mimic the steps of long division with whole numbers. We're just kind of tweaking it to apply it to algebra. You divide the first term of the dividend by the first term of the divisor, and that becomes the first term of the quotient. And then you multiply that first term of the quotient by the divisor and subtract it. And this is where most of the mistakes happen. So this step 4 is where students need to be the most cautious because you're subtracting a polynomial. And we've already practiced subtracting polynomials. And what you have to remember is you distribute a negative. So you're basically distributing this negative and then applying it. So we have to make sure we subtract the whole polynomial when we take that term in the quotient and multiply it by the divisor. Okay, once you do that, you bring down the next term and then you just start the whole process over. So it's very, very similar to the steps of just long division with whole numbers. But again, we're kind of tweaking it and applying it to algebra. It gets messier. I'll tell you that. It definitely gets messier. Okay, so let's start. I like to have a section where I can do some side work, and then I like to have a section where I'm doing the actual division. So I'm going to do the division over here. So my divisor and dividend, they're already in standard form. So I'm just going to write them. The dividend goes under the little house for long division, and the divisor goes out front. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to take the first term of the dividend and we're going to divide it by the first term of the divisor. So off to the side, I've got x squared divided by x. Well, using the quotient rule, we know that this is x to the 2 minus 1 power, or x by itself. So it's x to the first power. And what I'm going to do is that's going to become the first term of my quotient. But you always want to think like terms. You want to line up matching variable parts. So I'm not going to put this x over the x squared term. I'm going to put it over the x term. So x squared divided by x is x. I'm sorry, I've just made so many videos. Okay, so now I want to take that term in the quotient that I've just found, x, and I want to multiply it by the divisor, which is x plus 5. So that becomes x squared plus 5x. But we have to subtract this. And this is where the mistakes are made. If I'm going to subtract this, I really need to think of multiplying this whole thing by -1. So when I multiply that by -1, it becomes x squared minus 5x, and then I just want to combine like terms. So be really careful with this idea of taking what's in the quotient, multiplying it by the divisor, and subtracting it. You have to subtract each term, which basically just changes their sign. So now x squared minus x squared, that just becomes 0. And then 7x minus 5x is 2x. And then just drop down. Generally, I drop down the rest of the dividend. So I'm going to go ahead and drop down plus 10. And then I repeat. Okay, I'm going to do the whole process over. So I take the first term of my new dividend, which is 2x plus 10. I'm going to divide it by the first term of my divisor, which is x. Well, 2x divided by x is just 2. The x's, x divided by x is just 1, so I'm left with 2. So I'm going to put a plus 2 here since the 2 is positive. And now I take plus 2 and I multiply it by the divisor. So I take 2 times the divisor, which is x plus 5. So that gives me 2x plus 10. But remember, we have to subtract it. So in order to subtract it, I basically just distribute a -1. And that makes it -2x minus 10. I combine like terms. Well, 2x minus 2x is 0. 10 minus 10 is 0. I get a 0 remainder. That tells me I'm done. And my final quotient is x plus 2. So here's the cool thing. You can check your work. We have to remember this idea of inverse operations. So inverse operations are operations that will undo each other. So addition and subtraction undo each other, multiplication and division undo each other. So if I wanted to check myself, I can take my quotient, multiply it by my divisor. So I can take x plus 2, that's my quotient, multiply it by my divisor, which is x plus 5. So we can just do the FOIL method. So I'm going to do this kind of quickly for the sake of time, but we get x times x, which is x squared. X times 5 is 5x. 2 times x is 2x. 2 times 5 is 10. And if we simplify, we get x squared plus 7x plus 10. And if you look at this, that is exactly our dividend. Okay? So you can check your answers here. So remember, our final quotient here would just be x plus 2. So we would say x plus 5 goes into x squared plus 7x plus 10, x plus 2 times. Okay? Let's try the next example. Okay? So same thing. We're going to do some side work. So I'm going to set up my division here on the left. So I get 2x squared minus 13x plus 21. That is in standard form. I'm going to divide that by x minus 3. I'm really sorry about the tickle. All right, we're going to take the first term in the dividend and divide it by the first term in the divisor. So that becomes 2x squared divided by just x. Well, the x in the denominator cancels one of the two x's in the numerator, leaving me with just 2x. Okay, so I'm going to put my 2x up here. Remember, we want to keep like variables together. So we want to keep everything kind of in columns based on the type of variable we have. Now I've got to take my 2x and multiply it by my divisor, which is x minus 3. So that gives me 2x squared minus 6x. But remember, we have to subtract this. So we basically just distribute a -1 through 2x squared minus 6. And what that does is it changes those signs. So I think it's 2x squared minus 6x. So I'm going to subtract 2x squared. I'm going to add 6x because when I take a negative and multiply it by a negative, it becomes addition. Okay, so watch your signs very, very carefully. Well, 2x squared minus 2x squared is 0. And then negative 13x plus 6x is negative 7x. And then drop down the next term. Okay, and then you just repeat the process. Be especially careful right here where you subtract the quotient times the divisor. That's the biggest area where iffy things can happen. All right, now we just repeat the process. We take the first term of our new dividend, which is 7x or negative 7x plus 21. So I take negative 7x, I divide it by x. Well, x divided by x is just 1. Anything divided by itself is 1. So that just leaves me with negative 7 times 1 or negative 7. So that becomes the next term of my quotient. So I'm going to go up here and put minus 7 since that was negative. And then I take negative 7 times x minus 3, which is negative 7x plus 21. And then remember, we have to subtract that. So it's really taking a -1 and distributing it through negative 7x plus 21. So it changes our signs. So -1 times negative 7x is plus 7x. And -1 times 21 is negative 21. We combine like terms. Negative 7x plus 7x is 0. 21 minus 21 is 0. I've got my 0 remainder. That tells me I'm done dividing. I don't have a remainder at all. And my final quotient is 2x minus 7. And again, you can check your work if you want to. You don't have to, but just know that you can. So I would take x minus 3, the dividend or the divisor, multiply it by the quotient, which is 2x minus 7. So again, quotient times divisor or divisor times quotient, same thing. We go ahead and FOIL. So let's see, we get 2x squared minus 7x minus 6x plus 21, which is 2x squared minus 13x plus 21. And notice that is our dividend. Okay, so if you take your quotient, multiply it by your divisor, you should get your dividend. Okay, so hopefully you see the parallels between dividing a polynomial by a binomial compared to just dividing whole numbers. It's the same process, we just have to tweak it to incorporate the ideas of algebra.